year, I'm told. This is Ray in the middle, and I didn't bother to write the other folks down, but +4s was standard. In 1924, they came in second, and in 1925, come on there, fellas. Here we go, 1925, they won again. I think it's interesting to see in 2 years how the dress code slipped. Kind of getting sloppy already, huh? So he was 15 the first time he won that championship, which is today the junior sailing championship of the U.S. Sears Cup. So he began to be sought out as a crew member and a clever yachting kid by leading figures in the Massachusetts Bay yachting establishment. He sailed R boats and Q boats in Marblehead. Among them was a boat called Q boat called Hornet. If I can get this to go over. Come on there, fellas. Maybe I got a low battery here. You could advance it. Yeah, that may be easier. That's the Q boat. They certainly had beautiful boats to sail in those days. And then he bought what was thought to be an uncompetitive R boat from her designer Frank Payne and proceeded to beat the new Rs, including one sailed by Payne himself in what was then the principal arena for these boats. Frank Payne took an interest in this astute youngster and in 1929 was sent down to Oyster Bay with Payne's new 8-meter Gypsy for the eliminations to select the Sewanee Cup defender. Hunt and Gypsy were selected, but it made the committee nervous that this 21-year-old kid from Boston had been trouncing the best of the America's 8s with a crew of 3 instead of 5, and so they made him take on 2 extra hands. And then Gypsy lost the series by a narrow margin. Hunt told Yachting decades later that, quote, "We could race that boat quite satisfactorily with 3, and the 2 added crew had no experience in 8s and never worked into our system at all." He also, oops, I beg your pardon. Go back one. Sorry, these are probably sequenced. I'm sorry. This is Yankee, a big J boat that he was crew and occasionally skipper of at the same time. So he was well sought after, that's for sure. And this slide sort of summarizes his early sailing success. And I love this photograph, and that's what begat the title Rock Star Sailor. I mean, the arrogance there is pretty strong, but well earned, as you can see. So how did Ray Hunt go from this rock star young sailor guy to a designer and inventor of some of the most significant boats of our time? A couple of years at Andover was all the formal education he bothered with. He never got any university training in naval architecture or engineering. In the, let's see, he's got a very handsome photograph here. We think, if I've got this right, this was about the time of Andover. In the Depression years, when boat sales were not so great, he and other sailing types hung around the Boston design offices of Alden and Frank Payne and talked boats, often over 7-cent lunches down at Durgan Park. I can remember when they were about $7, and now they're probably about $27. No doubt, we think Ray absorbed a lot of the boat design business from Payne at this time. Waldo Howland was part of that crowd, and soon they were to form the Concordia Company. This is not 1920, obviously. He might have become a boat captain or a yacht broker. We hear he did well in the stock market, enough so that his brokerage house offered him a job. And some say trading was a passion with him, but I think he had a desire to build and create things. His success as a sailor gave him great confidence. Winning will do that. You win a lot, all of a sudden you think you're pretty good. And his life on the water gave him an innate understanding of how boats work. In 1932, he married Barbara Dean from Cohasset and started a family. And that is certainly a surefire way to focus a man's mind and energy on work. And here they are. This is not a wedding photograph. I call this the Bonnie and Clyde picture because they, to me, look like they're up to no good. His first big break in design came in 1938 when Wellenhausen gave him and Waldo the task to design a new cruising boat, and the Concordia yawl was born. In a last gasp of yachting before the war in 1938, Ray won the Royal Bermuda Yacht Club's Challenge Cup in a chartered 6-meter. And in a pattern that he maintained his entire career, he had many projects going at one time. And the Radical 110 appeared at that time, before World War II interrupted everything. The war years found Ray in Cohasset, where he was a chief boatswain's mate in the Coast Guard. And I have some more family photos here, which give you a taste of him, Ray, and his family. This is on Zara, I believe, that they sailed a great deal, all over the place. Here they are in the Bahamas. Can you imagine Jim Hunt as a teenager? There you go. And here's the whole family that looks a little better. You have Diana, Jim, Ray, Barbara, Josh, and Kate. Wholesome looking, I think. After the war, the return to civilian life brought a surge in yachting and boat building. Ray moved to Marblehead and the sailing center, really, of the Northeast, and formed a partnership with a young sailmaker named Ted Hood. Here's the letterhead from that period. I love the very long phone numbers. They were designing boats, building boats, chartering boats, selling boats, anything, and making the sails for them, of course. And together, it was at this time that they developed the modern spinnaker that we use today. This was a triumvirate that often sailed together quite a lot. Ted, Ray, and Brad Noyes. His pace accelerated even faster after 1950, and he really achieved his greatest successes and disappointments over the next 15 years. The chronology of it all is a little hard to follow because he snapped back and forth between powerboats and sailboats and back to powerboats again. So I'm going to take it design by design and start with the relatively unorthodox 10s. A lot of people know about 110s and 210s, but there were a whole string of them. There really were. The 23-foot 110 began as an experiment in the use of plywood in the 1930s. Ray was experimenting with plywood in his Cohasset workshop, according to some of his friends like Dick Fisher, Boston whaler. The challenge was how to make a cheap race boat out of this new wonderful material. The Fisher Pierce Company built the first few before the war, and then Lawley's and some others put it into production. And the 110s, as those of you know, they're flat bottom plywood coffins, they were called. And certainly on Buzzards Bay, there were submarines. They would go out, get full of water, and get dragged back. I remember when I worked at the yacht club in Marion, they'd come back to the dock, and the kids were soaking wet, and the boats were floating right down, and we'd have to pump them out. Not a good boat for Buzzards Bay. Later on came the 210. Well, I really like this sort of retro brochure cover. This is from that period, sort of a classic. The 210 class, another one of those. The 210 class came along, and it was a little bit sexier version of the 110. It had nicer ends to it, and more canoe-shaped sections. This is a series of brochures. You can see that it had a lot of longevity. It was a drier boat. It was bigger, obviously, so it was a little bit drier. There's its profile. But the simplicity of these things is quite remarkable. Very unusual. There's an older one under sail. 105. And there's the lines plan drawn by Fenwick Williams, who was one of Ray's draftsmen from Marblehead. And Fenwick was a character, I'm told, very nearsighted apparently, and his mother supposedly wouldn't let him wear glasses. The story was the only way Fenwick could see a drawing was to pass it by like this, sort of scan it. But the drawings he made were absolutely wonderful. But you can see that this is pretty unusual stuff, but very simple, to the point. Pretty neat. Later on came the 410, which is just a larger version, 36-footer, a little more shapely, and another sailing success for Ray. In 1948 at Troyes, won the New London Marblehead race by 2 hours. According to Jim, who sailed with Ray, the race committee thought they had cheated and gone through the Cape Cod Canal. But in those days, you had to sign in at both ends and sign out at the other end of the canal, so they checked, and no, they didn't go through the canal. They went around Cape Cod. Later that summer, they won the Edgartown Regatta. Here is the 45-foot 510, very similar to the 210, but a much bigger boat. This is a drawing that we did at Hunt Associates a few years ago, probably more than I remember now, an updated version of it, but the lines are still the same. I'd like to read a comment that John Decknatel wrote about a description of it, just to sort of put it in context. Today, a boat like this would be termed a ULDB, ultralight displacement, or as a boat builder friend of ours in the old days called them balloons on a stick. That was Alan Veitzes. Probably some of you knew Alan Veitzes. She's an extension of the concept of the 110, although it's more like a 2. Ray preferred the 110 type in later years, and he thought that the plumb ends were more functional. But the 210, 510 type was developed really for aesthetic reasons, to soften the looks and make the boat drier. The 510 typifies some of Ray's design concepts. Low wetted area with a separate rudder and skeg, and with a bulb fin keel, and very good form stability for the beam. A 1010 project, a boat of a roughly 12 meter size, was stifled due to poor tank test results that Ray really didn't believe. In fact, the story goes that Ray noticed that when the boat went down the tank backwards, it had less resistance than forwards, which caused Ray to wonder why we didn't turn the keels around. But that never quite happened. In later years, it would prove Ray would be proved right when they recalibrated the leeway predictions and so on. And once again, Ray seemed to be ahead of his time. In 1949, and here's the boat that was built. There was only one built. That's Ray sailing Barbara. And Ray and Barbara, his wife, sailed that boat on the New York Yacht Club cruise when they beat the biggest boat in the fleet, Baruna, 72-footer, with a paid professional crew, et cetera, et cetera. Just the two of them beat them boat for boat. And today, of course, 110 and 210 fleets are still sailing all over the place. And somebody today needs to build another 510. That would be a wonderful thing. Go see our website. There's one on it. Now, for something a little different, the Concordias. Ray and Waldo Howland had designed and built several boats together before the 39 and 41-foot yawls were conceived. And they did not intend this design to be anything more than one boat for Waldo's father. But in the end, 100 were built, or more. And most are still alive today. They're treasured like fine furniture. And I swear there are owners who just like to look at them on their moorings. And I can't pretend to know every detail about these boats. Oops, I'm losing my microphone here. Okay, got it. Certainly there are people that know much more about the Concordias than I do, and I couldn't do justice to talking about them in any great detail. But in any case, the Concordia yawl was a huge success and has achieved a Hall of Fame status among sailing yachts. And if you haven't seen it, you need to go see the magnificent model upstairs that was built, this boat. The time that went into the model, you could have built a real boat, for sure. For Waldo, the Concordia was to be merely an extension, as he put it, of a modest and comfortable New England home with natural knotty pine and locust interiors, corduroy fabrics, and white paint. For Ray, well, he gave it his usual balanced hull shapes and no distortions for any racing rule, but of course, it was a successful racer. And it did a lot of winning, including the Bermuda race in 1954, Cowes Week in 1955, Halifax in 1955, New London, Annapolis 1955, Annapolis, Newport 1957, and Bermuda again in 1978. And then there were so many first-in-class victories in cup after cup after cup. The major Ray Hunt Concordia victory, this is the sail plan, obviously. This is Ray's boat, Harrier. Ray and his family picked up this 41-foot sloop at the builder's yard in Germany in 1955 and sailed it through Holland and across the channel to Cowes. With a family as crew, they won 6 out of 6 races at Cowes Week. And they, excuse me, and they were leading the Fastnet race when a turnbuckle let go, costing them that race. The Brits went crazy about the boat with a family crew. All the attention somewhat unnerved Ray, as I'm told. He was basically shy, and he avoided the publicity. They gave out cash prizes in those days, but Ray was afraid that that would hurt his amateur status. So he persuaded the race committee to give him a clock barometer trophy instead. And this is the plaque from that trophy. And all those firsts, you know, that's quite something. Imagine winning 6 out of 6 races. I don't think anybody's done it before or since. I mean, that's bigger than the Red Sox in '04. Well, maybe, I don't know. They had to wait 86 years.